What I'll be doing today is fact-checking Kamala Harris's claim that she is America's first black vice president.
I do not believe you are a racist, and it's personal, and it was hurtful. You know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools, and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Now, it makes no difference to me what anyone's skin color is, what their ethnic background is, or where they're from. The truth is, we're all various shades of brown. I'm married to a Laotian immigrant, Wanda. Her Laotian name is Vondalone. The communists conquered her country, Laos, in 1975. Wanda escaped in 1978, walked many days and nights through the Laotian jungle, made it across the Mekong River to Thailand, then found her way to a refugee camp in Thailand. She lived there for 18 months before arriving in San Francisco in November of 1979. Upon arrival, she owned 2 dresses and 1 pair of sandals, and she knew no English. She built a life for herself here, and she's never thought of America as a racist country. Says she's never experienced any racism in America. Says she's felt nothing but welcome here. Wanda loves America. But Kamala Harris is always talking about how racist America is.
America has a long history of systemic racism. Full stop.
And Kamala thinks it's very important to emphasize that she is black. And she keeps telling us how she's had to overcome all kinds of racism and systemic racism in America because she's black, she claims.
Growing up, my sister and I had to deal with the neighbor who told us her parents couldn't play with us because we were black.
Now, does anyone actually believe that this happened? Sounds to me like Joe Biden's story about corn pop. Sounds made up to me. The truth is, Kamala's mom was from India, so Kamala is 50% Indian, or Southeast Asian. In other words, not black. Kamala does not emphasize her half that is Southeast Asian. Why not? Well, because that doesn't benefit her very much politically here in America. Here in America, it's much better to be an African American, because there are more African Americans than people from India here in America. India Americans are a small voting bloc in America, about 6% of the vote, and they're divided politically. African Americans are a key constituency of the Democrat Party, representing about 12% of the vote nationally. Black Americans are also a key voting bloc in key swing states, like Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan. If black support for Democrats erodes by even a few percentage points, Democrats are in big trouble. Joe Biden picked Kamala Harris as his running mate as his vice president to shore up the black vote, not the India vote. If India Americans were a bigger voting bloc than the black vote, Kamala Harris would be emphasizing the India half of her ancestry. So Kamala is 50% Indian. Her mom's name was Shyamala Gopalan, and Kamala's mom was born in India's Madras province. Kamala's mom was in the Brahmin caste, which is the most privileged caste in India. India had a social caste system until 1950. It was then abolished by law. But the social caste system is still in place culturally in much of India. If you have the misfortune of being in one of the lower social castes, you have almost no chance of making it in India. How you do in India largely depends on what social caste you happen to be born into. And here's the social caste pyramid here. And here's Kamala's mom's social caste here, at the top. Because Kamala's mom was in the top social caste in India, she was able to get her PhD at the University of California at Berkeley. She became a cancer researcher at Berkeley and served on a presidential commission on breast cancer. In other words, Kamala's mom was born into privilege, the highest social caste in India, which allowed her to pursue her PhD and become an accomplished cancer researcher at one of America's most prestigious universities. But what about Kamala's dad, Donald Harris? Donald Harris, Kamala's dad, also got his PhD at the University of California at Berkeley. His PhD was in economics, and he became an economics professor at Stanford University, one of the most elite universities in America. So Kamala Harris grew up in a very well-off family, with both parents college professors. But also, her parents were radical left. Her dad was described as a Marxist scholar by the Stanford Daily in 1976. Donald Harris met Kamala's mom at Berkeley at a meeting of activists that helped establish a local chapter of the ultra-violent Black Panther Party. And here's Kamala's current family. a very nice-looking family. She married an attorney named Doug Emhoff. But here's where it gets amusing. Kamala's dad, Donald Harris, the Marxist scholar at Stanford, was a descendant of a notorious and brutal Irish slave trader named Hamilton Brown. Here's what the Irish Times says about Hamilton Brown. Quote, Hamilton Brown was born in Northern Ireland in 1776, the year of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Brown emigrated to Jamaica, then a British colony, and became an enthusiastic slave owner on the sugar plantations that were the mainstay of the island's economy. And Hamilton Brown strongly opposed the abolition of slavery across the British Empire. Brown owned 1,120 slaves. And Kamala's dad grew up in Brownstown, which was a settlement founded by Hamilton Brown, the notorious slave trader. Now, some of the fake news outlets are trying to cast doubt on whether Kamala really was a descendant of the notorious and famous slave trader Hamilton Brown, because this is something of an embarrassment to her. But this information comes from Kamala's dad, Donald Harris, who wrote in his book that his paternal grandmother was Christiana Brown, a descendant of the Irish plantation and slave owner Hamilton Brown. That's what Kamala's dad wrote. So I'll take Kamala's dad as the authority on this. Also, a well-respected Irish historian named Stephen McCracken conducted a genealogical research study, and he concluded that Kamala's dad, Donald Harris, is indeed correct. Kamala Harris is a descendant from the 19th century Irish slave trader Hamilton Brown. Hamilton Brown was Kamala's great-great-great-great-grandfather. He was born in 1776, the year of our country's founding. This also means that Kamala Harris is part Irish. And here's Kamala as a baby in Jamaica with her great-grandmom, whose name was Iris Finnegan. Sounds pretty Irish. When slavery was being abolished across the British Empire in the 1830s, Hamilton Brown was a strong opponent of abolishing slavery. And the British government had to pay Hamilton Brown about $15 million in today's money to give up his slaves, according to records held by the University College London. So then this begs the question, is Kamala Harris black? Well, she's 50% Indian, or 50% Southeast Asian, and she's part Irish. We don't exactly know what percent Irish she is, but because there was a lot of raping of female slaves by Irish slaveholders in Jamaica, there is a heavy strain of Irish ancestry in the people of Jamaica. And the reason the Irish were so prevalent in Jamaica was due in large part to Oliver Cromwell's capture of Jamaica from Spain in 1655. He then transported captured Irish prisoners to Jamaica as indentured servants to colonize Jamaica for Britain in exchange for their freedom. As a result, about 25% of Jamaicans have Irish ancestry, including Kamala's dad, whose grandmother on the father's side was Christiana Brown, who was the great-great-great-granddaughter of the Irish slave trader Hamilton Brown. This means that Kamala's dad had Irish ancestry both on his mom's side and his dad's side. So this would make Kamala about what percentage black? I'd give her about 1/3. Kamala is not boasting about her rather extensive Irish ancestry or Indian ancestry, because that's just not politically advantageous to her.
And you all helped us win in 2020, and we're going to do it again in 2024. Yes, we will.
However, in her memoir, Kamala hardly talks about her dad at all. He's little more than a footnote. Her parents got divorced when she was 7. She, her sister, and her mom moved to Quebec, Canada, French-speaking Quebec, Canada, to Montreal when she was 12. And that's where she was raised. She lived there for about 8 years. And she attended college in Montreal before she transferred to Howard University in Washington, D.C. So Kamala was raised in French-speaking Quebec, Canada. So there really just wasn't much in Kamala's upbringing that could be considered culturally black. But here's the counterpoint. In America, what percentage of African ancestry is required to classify oneself as African American? Well, I looked it up. There is no minimum requirement. Since the early 20th century, we've been living under what's called the one-drop rule, which is that if you have even one drop of African ancestry in you, you can say you're black if you want to. So this would seem to mean that all of us are black. And there does seem to be broad agreement among biologists, anthropologists, and the Bible that humans originated from Africa. So we can all say we're black. including Kamala. In other words, she's not lying. And Elon Musk, of course, is a true African American. He was actually born and raised in Africa. But it really doesn't matter, does it? This entire discussion is beyond absurd. But this is the state of political discourse today. And it really doesn't matter what our ancestors might have done either. We all undoubtedly had ancestors who have done horrible things. Let's say you were a descendant of the child serial killer John Gacy. Would that make you a bad person? Would you owe reparations to the families of all those children who John Gacy killed? Of course not. John Gacy's children had nothing to do with his crimes. But this is what Kamala Harris and today's Democrat Party are proposing. You are guilty if your ancestors did some bad things. Kamala Harris and the Democrats want American taxpayers to pay reparations to black people for slavery, even though slavery ended with Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. And even though 700,000 Americans died on the battlefields of the Civil War to end slavery. 700,000 dead in the Civil War was the reparations. But Kamala thinks that taxpayers should keep on paying reparations for slavery.
Where do you stand on some form of reparations for black people?
Well, look, I think that we have got to address that. Again, it's back to the inequities. America has a history of 200 years of slavery, but we have a history of racism in America.
So you are for some type of
Yes, I am.
reparation? Okay.
Yes, I am.
So then, should Kamala pay reparations to the folks of Jamaica for the crimes of her slave-trading ancestor, Hamilton Brown? Obviously, this is a ridiculous idea. But also, the population in the United States was only 32 million people at the time of the Civil War. The U.S. population today is 334 million, more than 10 times more than the population at the time of the Civil War, which was a war fought over slavery. The vast majority of Americans are descendants from immigrants who arrived here after the Civil War and have no ancestral connection with American slavery whatsoever. And Kamala Harris herself has no connection with American slavery. Her father was from Jamaica. Her ancestral connection was to a notorious Irish slave trader in Jamaica. So under Kamala Harris's logic and the logic of today's Democrat Party, should my wife Wanda pay reparations for slavery? She arrived here from Laos in 1979 after escaping the communists. She arrived here with nothing, didn't know any English. But she flourished in America because she's not a bellyacre. She's not a complainer. But also slavery has been the norm throughout human history. And slavery has been prevalent throughout Africa's history, and is still practiced today in Africa. Before the transatlantic slave trade began in the 16th century, African societies would enslave captives from other tribes and groups as prisoners of war. Slavery was the norm in Africa. And when Europeans needed more labor to produce commodities like sugar, tobacco, and cotton, they bought slaves from African slave owners. White folks were also subject to slavery. During America's colonial period from 1619 to 1776, 300,000 to 400,000 white people were brought to the American colonies as slaves. This is chronicled in a book called White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America by Don Jordan and Michael Walsh. And this book was not just some right-wing screed. This book was published by New York University Press. And this book was endorsed by Toni Morrison, the Nobel Prize-winning author of The Color Purple. Here's what Toni Morrison says. Every civilization in the world relied on slavery. The notion was that there was a difference between black slaves and white slaves, but there wasn't, says Toni Morrison. So should the descendants of these white slaves also get reparations? Obviously, that would be nonsense. And by the way, it's estimated that today there are more than 400,000 slaves in the United States, according to the Global Slavery Index. Slavery in America today takes the form of forced sex workers, child sex trafficking, forced labor, forced marriage, forced domestic servitude, bonded labor, and forced child labor. Child sex trafficking is a $32 billion industry worldwide, and it's going on right now. And of course, the wide-open southern border under Biden-Harris has intensified the child sex and human trafficking crisis in the United States.
A full-blown humanitarian crisis is unfolding on the southern border. Biden and the Democrats want America to believe that there is nothing dangerous about hundreds of thousands of people pouring across our borders. No verification, no ID.
We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
Children being ferried over the river by human traffickers on rafts in the dead of night. Migrants, many of them teens and younger, packed together behind metal fences. Human traffickers crossing back and forth over the border with relative ease. A border wall left unfinished, open for migrants to easily traverse.
Under Biden-Harris, the United States government has become the middleman in a multi-billion-dollar human trafficking operation targeting unaccompanied minors at the southern border. But Kamala isn't doing anything to stop this modern form of slavery, even though President Joe Biden put her in charge of the southern border. Kamala only wants reparations for a certain group of people for certain things that happened nearly 200 years ago. So what's up with the Democrat Party's obsession with race? Well, mainly it's political. They want to assemble a coalition of supposedly oppressed groups that can deliver victory for Democrats in the elections. But pitting groups of people against each other is also an updated variation of Marxism and communism. Karl Marx, of course, wrote about class warfare emerging between the capitalists and the workers. And communism rejects ownership of private property. Under communism, the government controls the production and distribution of all goods and services. So under Karl Marx's scheme, the workers were the oppressed. And he would predict that they would rise up and overthrow the capitalists. In today's Democrat politics, the oppressed groups are said to be racial minorities, LGBTQ folks, and women. There's also a hierarchy of these allegedly oppressed groups. So it's better to be a black woman than a black man in today's Democrat Party politics. And it's best to be an LGBTQ black woman. Like that completely incompetent Biden press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, KJP. What Democrats and their propagandists in the media try to do is foment conflict by hammering the message to their constituency that they are victims of systemic racism, homophobia, misogyny, and so on. So under this new updated version of Marxism in America, the oppressed in America are racial minorities, LGBTQ plus folks, and women. And the oppressors, sometimes called the colonizers by the left, are white males. And Biden chose Kamala Harris as his vice president because she checks two of the boxes of supposed victimhood. When Kamala Harris was in the Senate, she had the most left voting record of anyone in the Senate. She was even to the left of the self-described socialist Bernie Sanders.
You're considered the most liberal United States senator.
Somebody said that, and it actually was Mike Pence on the debate stage. But
yeah, well, actually, the nonpartisan GovTrack has rated you as the most liberal senator.
Kamala Harris is a Marxist. She is a communist. And don't take my word for it, just listen to what Kamala says over and over again.
we must understand what are disparities and then accommodate and adjust for those disparities if we want equal outcomes. So environmental justice raises those points, right? Equitable outcomes. Is everyone coming out the same way? Well, if they don't, look, if you don't start on the same base, everybody can have an equal amount. You're still not going to end up on the same base, right? If we want equal outcomes, we need to take into account not everybody starts out on the same base, and we have to make adjustments.
What she's talking about here is the exact opposite of the American idea as described in America's founding document, our Declaration of Independence, which states that we all have an unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this idea was enshrined in our Constitution, the idea of equal treatment under the law. Everyone was to be treated equally under the law. To say we must all end up in the same place, that we all must end up equally, is the very opposite of freedom. It's the very opposite of equality under the law. It's the opposite of the American idea. It's communism. And of course, people in communist countries don't actually end up equally. They don't actually end up in the same place. In communist countries, those who have the political power end up fabulously wealthy. Everyone else ends up in poverty, or in slave labor camps, or in mass graves under the more extreme versions of communism. That's what communism has produced historically. The American idea of equality is equality under the law. Kamala Harris says she's not for equality under the law. She says she's for equal outcomes.
Equality suggests often everybody should get the same thing. Well, that often assumes everybody started out in the same place, as opposed to equity, which is everyone should end up in the same place. And
that's the very definition of communism, which has actually never been achieved in practice. Kim Jong-un in North Korea is not equal to the rest of the citizenry there. The North Korean people are living in grinding poverty, or they're in slave labor camps. So Kamala says that the problem is that we don't all start out in the same place.
If we want equal outcomes, we need to take into account not everybody starts out on the same base.
That's because we're all unique individuals. We have different talents, different motivations. We come from different backgrounds. After the communists took over my wife's country in the 1970s, she escaped at the age of 13 by walking 4 days and 4 nights through the jungle, got across the Mekong River, found her way to a refugee camp in Thailand, lived there for 18 months, then managed to get here, arrived in San Francisco in November of 1979, owning 2 dresses and 1 pair of sandals, not knowing any English. She managed to graduate from high school with a B average while holding down 3 jobs throughout high school. She took classes at the local community college on how to become a legal secretary. She was hired by Geico, and she was Employee of the Month 5 times for the entire Geico Corporation. And while she was employed at Geico, she was holding down a second job as an assistant to a big realtor in the Washington, D.C. area. And she learned about rental properties. She bought rental properties. And she manages 27 tenants. Wanda started with nothing and made it in America. That's the promise of America. None of us start off in the same place because we're individuals from different backgrounds. The promise of America is that anyone can make it in America if you work hard, assuming, of course, that you're healthy. That doesn't mean we can all reach the level of Elon Musk, who also came here with almost nothing as an immigrant, and very few of us would even try to match Elon Musk. Some of us want to be artists and aren't trying to get rich, because we're individuals with our own goals and aspirations. We're not all trying to start in the same place or end up in the same place. Take me, for example. I'm not primarily motivated by earning a lot of money. I earn as much money as I need to be able to do the things that I want to do. I've never had any interest whatsoever in becoming a billionaire. My attitude has always been you can only live in one room at a time. You don't need a giant mansion. You don't need a private jet. I live the life of the mind. I like to think, to write, to experience life. I have no interest in building and managing a large business. And I actually did build a very successful advertising agency. But I really didn't want to manage a lot of people and run a big organization. So I sold it. And I haven't had to go to a real office since the 1990s. Because that's the life I chose to lead. Elon Musk chose his path. He's launching rockets into space. He wants to colonize other planets and turn humans into an interplanetary species. He has enormous ambitions. Others have more modest goals and aspirations. Some want to be artists, musicians, Buddhist monks. You can be whatever you want to be in America. That's what's great about America. America allows us to choose our own path because we're individuals. That's what freedom is. We're not all supposed to end up in the same place. And none of us start in the same place.
We have always fought for equality. But now we are also talking much more rightly about equity. Understanding that we must be clear-eyed about the fact that, yes, we want everyone to get an equal amount. That sounds right. But not everyone starts out from the same place. Some people start out on first base, some people start out on third base. And if the goal is truly about equality, it has to be about a goal of saying everybody should end up in the same place. And since we didn't start in the same place, some folks might need more. Equitable distribution.
What the hell is Kamala Harris even talking about here? She's so stupid she probably doesn't know what she's talking about. But what she's saying is sheer insanity. And it is Marxism. It's communism, which is very materialistic. And of course, this idea that we should all end up in the same place, all end up equally, actually resulted in the slaughter of hundreds of millions of people over just the last 100 years. And what is she even talking about here?
Equality suggests often everybody should get the same thing. Well, that often assumes everybody started out in the same place, as opposed to equity, which is everyone should end up in the same place.
Everyone should get the same thing. Who assumes everyone starts out in the same place? Did I start out with the same athletic talents as LeBron James, the same IQ as Albert Einstein, the same work ethic and strategic vision as Elon Musk? What the hell is Kamala even talking about here? No one but an idiot assumes that we all start out in the same place. What she's trying to say here is that we should not be for equality under law. We must be for something called equity. Not equality, equity. Which she says is that everyone should end up in the same place. What the left uses when they're talking about social justice. The theory of social justice is that we must be punished for the past wrongs of our ancestors. And she says we want everyone to get the same amount. What?
We have always fought for equality, but now we are also talking much more rightly about equity, understanding that we must be clear-eyed about the fact that, yes, we want everyone to get an equal amount. That sounds right.
No, that's not the American idea, that we're all supposed to get the same amount. And in her view, even this idea that we're all supposed to get the same amount is not socialist enough for her.
But not everyone starts out from the same place. Some people start out on first base, some people start out on third base. And if the goal is truly about equality, it has to be about a goal of saying everybody should end up in the same place. And since we didn't start in the same place, some folks might need more. Equitable distribution.
I have a friend who's a socialist, and he told me that he thinks that all the wealth in the world, all the wealth in the country, should be divided up equally. And so I said, okay, let's say we do that once. Just divide everything up so that everybody gets an equal amount. Let's try that. Well, people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and people like that, they're going to use their brains and their work ethic and their strategic vision to build successful businesses, while others are going to squander their money and not get much done. So in a few years, we'll have exactly the same wealth inequality. So what do we do then? So then he said, well, we'll just have to do it all over again. And that's what Kamala is saying. And that's what would happen over and over again if we all started out with the same amount and had to end up in the same place. And this requires government to constantly knock down the achievers. Plus, think about it. Would you rather give your money to the government to allocate? Or would you rather invest your money with Elon Musk? Is Elon Musk likely to make better use of the money that you invest with him than if you just hand this same money over to the government to allocate? Elon Musk is blasting rockets into space. He invented reusable rockets. He's also doing more than anyone on the planet to transition the world to clean, sustainable energy. And he's doing this without the use of government force. He's doing it on his own, by attracting capital, by attracting investors. And you can choose to invest in Elon or not. I certainly would rather invest my money with Elon than hand it to the government. And Tesla has been one of my biggest investments since 2018. That's what capitalism is. Capitalism says that the free market is a far more efficient allocator of capital than government bureaucracy. The role of government is supposed to be to establish rules that apply equally to everyone, to be a neutral referee, so that we're free to become the best version of ourselves. Or not. The role of government is not to ensure equal outcomes. It's just supposed to apply the laws and the rules equally. But Kamala doesn't understand this idea. She thinks we should all start out in the same place with the same amount and end up in the same place. But that ideology produces this. And to give you an idea of just how radical Kamala Harris is, listen to what she said in 2020 when the anti-police riots were going on in cities across America in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd.
And I want to make clear that I know that there are protests still happening in major cities across the United States.
That's right. But they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. And they're not, this is a movement, I'm telling you. They're not going to stop. And everyone beware, because they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that they're not going to let up, and they should not.
At least 30 people were killed in these riots, including police officers. There are billions of dollars in damages. A federal courthouse was set on fire. And Kamala thought this was just awesome. That's how radical she is. Her parents were Marxists. They met at a meeting on the Berkeley campus for the purpose of forming a local chapter of the ultra-violent Black Panther organization in the 1960s. And how radical is Kamala?
And yeah, I am radical. I do believe that we need to get radical about what we are doing and take it seriously.
Right.
When Wanda and I started dating, she was a Democrat. She was not very political. She was working 60 to 80 hours a week and didn't think about politics much. But she was also thankful to President Jimmy Carter for allowing her to come to America from that refugee camp in Thailand. So Wanda was a Democrat. But in 2008, she and I were watching Barack Obama speak on TV. And he was making all kinds of promises and saying he wanted to fundamentally transform America.
We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
And she looked at me and she said, wow, Obama sounds exactly like the communists I escaped from. So then she became a Republican. What Kamala Harris is talking about is far more radical than anything that Barack Obama talked about. And here Kamala explains that her strategy is to bring about her Marxist communist revolution in America by working from inside the government, from inside governing institutions.
I know that your mom was very politically active. What did you learn from her?
I learned that the greatest movements that we have seen in recent history in our country, but probably since the beginning, have been born out of protest, have been born out of understanding the power of the people to take to the streets and force their government to address what is wrong, the inequities, the inequalities, the unfairness. So when I made a decision to become a prosecutor, it was a conscious decision, which was to go inside the system and have some leverage there to effectuate change. I say that to say this. The only way we're going to truly achieve change is when there are people in the system who are willing or pushing to do it, and when there are those folks who are outside of the system demanding it. I am very clear that some of the success that we've been able to achieve around criminal justice reform would not have happened in recent years were it not for Black Lives Matter. And the intensity and the brilliance of that movement. These movements provide a counterforce to get us to where we need to be.
So America's founding document, our Declaration of Independence of 1776, states that we have unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And Dr. Martin Luther King, Reverend Martin Luther King, talked about these ideas all the time, was constantly quoting America's Declaration of Independence.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
So isn't it interesting that the left in America today hardly ever talks about Martin Luther King anymore, even though we have a holiday after Martin Luther King? Because he talked about the principles of our Declaration of Independence. He wanted the principles of the Declaration of Independence to be applied equally to everybody. He wanted people to be judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. Democrats don't talk about that anymore. They don't talk about Martin Luther King because the Democrat Party no longer believes in these principles, no longer believes in a colorblind society, no longer believes in equal treatment under the law. Under the American idea, we all have the unalienable right to pursue happiness, whatever that might mean for us as individuals. Some will achieve more, perhaps because they're smarter or work harder. Imagine how boring it would be to watch sporting events where every game ends in a tie. Well, life is like a game too. We admire the great achievers: Elon Musk, Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, Henry Ford, the Wright brothers. We admire people who are the very best at what they do. Rembrandt, Picasso, Mozart, Beethoven. And almost all human progress is achieved by the efforts of a few, the smartest 0.001% of people. Thomas Edison effectively gave us the modern world by harnessing electricity and inventing an early version of the light bulb. And by the way, he never went to high school or college. Not never graduated from high school or college, never attended high school or college. So all human progress is basically made possible by 0.001% of people. The rest of us are pretty much just going along for the ride. Why would we want to use government to beat down these achievers, these human progress producers? But that's what Kamala Harris and today's Democrat Party want to do. They don't want equality under the law or equal rules for all. They want us all to end up in the same place. No human progress can be achieved with that ideology. And the ideology of the left is primarily fueled by envy. Envy of the successful, envy of the achievers. I can't think of a more destructive message for young people than this idea that they can't succeed in America because of systemic racism or structural racism. The victim mindset is a loser's mindset. The emotion of envy is a loser's emotion. Today's Democrat Party is a party of complainers and bellyachers. We all have obstacles we have to overcome. Sometimes there are big obstacles, such as a physical disability or mental illness, or you grew up in poverty. Even billionaires have problems, sometimes big problems. Focus on how to overcome problems. Become a problem solver. Solving life's problems and overcoming obstacles in your path is a big part of what makes life interesting. Wouldn't life be boring if there were no problems to solve, no challenges to overcome? And personally, I've never seen myself in competition with anyone but myself. I'm not in competition with Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or LeBron James. I'm in competition with myself, that's all. Try to become the best version of myself that I can be, using whatever talents God has given me, or lack of talent. And I don't envy Elon Musk. I admire Elon Musk. Why would I envy Elon Musk? I'm thankful for brilliant people like Elon Musk, like Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, Henry Ford. They make life better for all of us. And Elon says that most people would not want to be him.
I think when I was, 5 or 6 or something, I thought I was insane. It was just strange. Because it was clear that other people did not. Their mind wasn't exploding with ideas. It was like, I'm strange. I don't think you'd necessarily want to be me.
You've got to be kidding me! What? Stick to landing,
Why is the left trying to tear this man down? No one is doing more than Elon to transition the planet to clean, sustainable energy, while also increasing the supply of cheap energy. If Democrats on the left really care about clean energy, they should love Elon. But Democrats on the left really don't care about clean air or clean water. They don't really care about climate change. The left only cares about political power. So they hate Elon now with a passion, especially because he left the Democrat Party. He was a Democrat for all of his life until a couple of years ago. And then he decided to save free speech in America by buying Twitter for $44 billion. He put his money where his principles are. Democrats thought they had pretty well succeeded in crushing free speech on all the social media platforms. Then Elon stepped in and saved free speech, because he said free speech is needed to protect civilization. And the left is furious with Elon for this. The Biden-Harris regime has launched at least 9 investigations that I've counted against Elon and his companies. Some of them criminal investigations. They're trying to tear him down. They're trying to destroy him. They're trying to put him in prison because he no longer toes the Democrat line, and because they envy success. Envy is the fuel that powers the Marxist left in today's Democrat Party. And envy is the most destructive emotion there is. And speaking of why envy is such a loser's emotion, I have a new book out called Win Life: Success Skills Schools Don't Teach. This book is the cure for the victim mindset that schools are teaching our kids. And it's the cure for the Democrat Party's politics of envy. This book is about how anyone in America can be successful. Perhaps not on the level of Elon Musk, but almost any healthy person can be in the top 1% of income earners by following the principles in this book. Or maybe you're not trying to be in the top 1% of income earners. Maybe you're just trying to lose 20 pounds and get into shape. This book will help you do that too. It's available on Amazon in all the formats.